Good evening, everyone. Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2012. If could all please rise for Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And this is our first official City Council meeting for the year of 2012. And to make this meeting official, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Pezza.
Here.
Gutenkopf.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Volumsky. Absent. York. Absent. Hipskin.
Here.
Healy. Absent. Levin.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Morley. Absent. Wagner.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
10 present, 4 absent.
10 present, 4 absent. We have an official quorum, and then we'll move on to item 2, which is receipt of communications and petitions from the public. If there's anyone with any written communication in our petitions, please rise at this time and present those to Clerk Spencer, who is here to my right. Seeing none, I would go on the public forum and ask Clerk Spencer if there's anyone signed up for public forum today. Clerk Spencer.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one person, and that's Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys.
And of course, Claude, we know ground rules 3 minutes. We'd love to hear from you, and take it away, Claude.
Happy New Year to everybody. Last meeting, I really was rather interested in the vigorous debate about $200,000. Rather a great concern by the city. But in the past, there's been very little debate about large sums of money. Mr. Morley wanted $10 million put on a potential TIF. No one asked where we'd come up with $10 million. Mr. Kennedy wanted $900,000 for sewer lining. Went through, no debate, no question where $900,000 is coming from. We needed extra funding for businesses. Mr. York would like to have that. No question from the alderman, no debate. Mr. Morley, in the early part of the last year, put a crimp on further hiring. Let alone in October, we spent $46,000. Nobody asked where the 46 was going to come from. But in regards to the hospital, that $200,000 really became a problem. I wonder why. The debate was about the hospital, not about the citizens, not about the homeowners, but about the hospital. Now the $200,000 to be covered. I'm going to be rather interested this year when we come to debate a new budget, and when we come to that new TIF that might just come about, how this council is going to come up with $10 million. It's a nice number, isn't it? But if this council, in the majority, can debate so seriously $200,000, I hope they debate the $10 million as well. And one question, there was something very interesting in the treasurer's report. Somehow this council passed $100,000 for Angela's restaurant. I wonder how that was budgeted. Very interesting, isn't it? I'm assured you all read the treasurer's report, every one of you. Interesting document. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude. Anyone else? Is that it for public forum, Clerk Spencer?
That concludes public forum.
Okay, I will officially close the public forum at this time. Move on to our consent agenda, or excuse me, announcements. Item 4. Any announcements for today? Anyone? Okay, move on to our consent agenda. Item 5. Is there anyone that has a question or might want to vote no on any particular item? Please indicate that now. Anybody? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the contents of the consent agenda in its entirety. Alderman Hipskin with a motion, seconded by Alderman Pezza, and roll call vote, Clerk Spencer, please.
Hipskin.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Palumski, absent. York, absent. Healy, absent. Levin,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Morley, absent. Wagner,
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
10 ayes, 0 nays.
10 ayes, 0 nays. The consent agenda passes, and we move on to item 6, which are reports and recommendations of appointed elected officials. Report from me. I really don't have much to report other than hope everyone had a great holiday and a happy and prosperous and healthy 2012. With that, I will pass on to item 6B to our city manager, Mr. Grabowski, 2011-12 five-year capital expenditure budget. Mr. Grabowski.
Thank you. Tom, I'm going to ask you to turn the power on for the projectors. I was playing around with it earlier, and That's it. Okay. Taken care of. Thank you very much. This, of course, is my first presentation to the council for any part of the budget process. As part of that, approximately a month ago, we sent out the first part of the budget book for your review, which included the five-year capital expenditure budget. So tonight, what we'd like to do is make a presentation, an overview of the capital expenditure budget, answer any questions that you may have, and then afterwards, as the council's done in the past, ask you to review the individual projects for each department within your committees. Street projects in Public Works, public safety projects, police projects in the Public Safety Committee, and so on. But before we get to that, I would like to thank Marilyn and Tom, Mike Hughes, for their input and the time spent with me in particular in understanding the plan, the five-year CIP. As I said before, this is a visual presentation and overview of the capital expenditure budget, which was delivered to the City Council approximately a month ago. As in years past, it's meant to be an overview, and more detailed conversation will take place within each committee as projects relate to them. A theme that I would place on this year's budget is maintenance. We're not proposing any new physical projects, really only maintaining those elements that we have and which are in need of being maintained. One item that I do want to point out before we get started is that you notice in the stormwater management flood mitigation area, there is not much money budgeted yet. And that is because with the task force reviewing the presentation that was made to the council a few weeks ago, they want some time to really digest that and make recommendations to the city council. So rather than plug a number in just for the sake of putting a number in there, we left it as what we know right now with the intention of, with the intention of amending the budget once we have an idea of the direction that we're gonna go. So with that, we'll get started. As you all know, I think most of you here have seen this before, five-year capital budget objective is to identify and create the comprehensive plan for long-range major expenditures necessary to maintain or develop the physical assets of the city. We identify those here in Elmhurst as those expenditures of $25,000 or more, which result in the acquisition or construction of fixed assets intended to be held or used for a period of 10 years or more. We further classify those expenditures on a 1 to 6 basis, as was in your budget book and is on the screen. And then further prioritize those A through D, essential and immediate need as A, letter B, essential but may be delayed, letter C, optional but beneficial to the city through increased productivity or safety, and lastly, those that are beneficial to the city in a social, cultural, or aesthetic way. So getting into the numbers, this is the overall five-year plan by priority. If you recall in your budget books, each project is graded, starting on page 4 of your budget book, excuse me, not page 4. Closer to page 9, I believe. page 8, we start to classify those projects by the priority and by the classification part of it. So just really going through the next fiscal year, 2012 and 13, you see that under priority A, we have $11.6 million in projects. Priority B, $12.4 million. Priority C, $250,000, and priority D, $3.8 million. And then there's the vehicle equipment and replacement fund as well. So total funds, or total expenditures proposed by priority is $28.8 million. Over the 5-year plan, which will vary from year to year, the total is approximately $70 million. And again, those are all broken out individually in the budget book, starting on page 8, and classified by department. So the highlights of the preliminary budget are public works infrastructure, IT and communications, land acquisition, stormwater improvements and flood mitigation projects, improvements to the central business district, and improvements to the parking system. To further break that out, the pie chart on the left shows the expenditures by fund, including the municipal utility fund, stormwater detention. The big part of that, of course, the general fund, which is then broken out further in the rectangle box to the right, and that is broken down essentially by department, though Public Works has a few of the different divisions in there, typical of any capital improvement budget. The next slide shows, slide shows the funding sources for the expenditure budget. And in the letter that preceded the budget, you recall we're projecting a very conservative growth of 1% to 2% in the major funds for the next 2 fiscal years. Beyond that, 1% to 4%, depending on which fund it is. You'll see the biggest funding source is the capital improvement fund at 26%, then the municipal utility fund, GO bonds, and the general fund. The others are made up of various other funds that we have. This further breaks the funding source by year and the funds that we use to classify each one. As you see down the list, and we'll break that down a little further here in the next slide. Starting with the CIF, the Capital Improvement Fund. And this is traditionally how we've set policy here and followed it, with the 80% of the state income tax going towards it, 1/4% of the home rule sales tax, 25% of the telecommunications tax, and then other various revenues that we have. And then those CIF funds go towards the infrastructure improvements, such as streets and sidewalks, building improvements. Right now, that would be phase 2 of the Public Works Garage, parking improvements, stormwater improvements, IT, public safety equipment, debt service, and public benefits included in the redevelopment of the development of the hospital site. So to further get into it, out of the general fund expenditures, we break that down. Again, you saw in the rectangle box earlier how each one of these are broken down into funds within the general fund for a total of $7.2 million in the next fiscal year, totaling $27.8 million over the 5 years. Again, subject to change as we move through the plan in the 5 years. Some of those projects coming out of the general fund would include $1.5 million for street resurfacing. The big street project that we have coming up would be the York Street from Vallette to South Palmer Drive. And with that, we've gotten a grant for more than 50% of the cost of that. So we continue our good fortune with getting grant funding. And a lot of kudos go to Mike and Marilyn and Tom for continuing to pursue those and bringing them in. Another project, we're starting to resurface some of our parking lots, and as we explained in the letter, we're putting that into the street resurfacing program from now on so that they will continually be maintained. And if anybody wants to see the number of parking lots that we have, I have a sheet here. I don't want to go through them because there are quite a few surface lots that we own. So what we're going to do is start funding that each year and then continuously maintain them. Another project that we'll be pursuing is safety improvements at West Avenue and the railroad tracks, and that is for sidewalk and gate improvements. Recall with the West Avenue project from this year, sidewalk is being installed outside of the railroad right-of-way. This project puts sidewalk across the tracks and puts the safety gates up, which are required by the railroad, or the ICC, excuse me. And then last is of the three improvements that we've committed to with the hospital development. This project is the York Brush Hill project, which we do have some grant money coming towards and a split between the city and the hospital for the balance. Moving on to the Municipal Utility Fund. As you can see, that is where the majority of our utilities, wastewater and water are maintained, along with the parking system and any stormwater detention projects and TIF projects. So with that and vehicle replacement, all funds total $28.8 million, as we talked about in the beginning. Going the 5 years out, projected $70 million worth of projects. Some of the Municipal Utility Fund projects include sewer lining, hydrant and valve replacement, and water main replacement. And again, these are projects that we are doing annually to make sure that our system is maintained well. We don't want to get into a position where we fall behind on any of these and have to catch up, because it'll only cost more in the future if that happens. One of the TIF projects that will be moving forward this year and in some way is the Addison Avenue project. We've talked about both options, just put them up there. Keep it fresh in everybody's minds. We'll be talking more about that in the near future. And then some stormwater management flood mitigation projects include some dredging and maintenance type stuff where, as I said in the beginning, once the stormwater task force has a chance to review the presentation, the findings from Burke and RJN, they'll be making recommendations to the City Council in the future, and we anticipate those improvements to be GO bond type improvements, type funding. A couple more projects in the TIF area, the Central Business District Streetscape Improvements. These are improvements that are being implemented as part of the long-range landscape plan that was done, just following through on that. I know the Public Works Committee talked about this, and in fact, on the consent agenda tonight was a contract with Trans-System to work further on that. And then land acquisition, I touched on briefly before. We're all aware of the Han Street project in the Pauli property, and then in TIF 3, the acquisition of property next to the Public Works Garage for Phase 2 improvements. So with that, we get into what's next. Capital is rolled into the 2-year operating, and then committee review of appropriate city department budgets, as I had mentioned in the beginning, The Finance Committee will review the revenues for the budget, and as we are working on now, and we'll start this week, reviewing individual department budgets with the budget team. And then, of course, final compilation of the proposed budget out to the city council for review, which gets us to our schedule. As you can see, we're pretty far down already. However, I would say that this is where the heavy lifting starts. So we're at the review of the 5-year capital expenditure budget. Notice that we did roll the presentation of the operating budget up 2 weeks. That was at my request to staff, so I'd have more time and city council would have more time to really get into that. So that should be delivered on or about the 21st. And then we start to, from now until then, of course, the committees will be reviewing the capital expenditure budget. We'll be fine-tuning the operating budget for delivery to city council and further discussion of that. And then we anticipate the beginning of April approval of the budget. And with that, I will entertain questions. We have a significant amount of staff in the audience tonight to help us out with that. But again, the committees will also be reviewing those in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Grabowski. And again, I'd like to mention that we will be breaking all these down in committee, and if there's specific questions, more than happy to answer, try to ask those tonight, but really there's a lot of committee work ahead of us with the numbers that we're looking at here. But if anybody has any questions or discussion for the city manager tonight, we're all ears. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jim, just a quick question. You had touched on the parking lot resurfacing, and can you mention again where that's going to be, where that's coming out of, what fund going forward, and where was that previously?
Tom, can you kind of detail back to the slide? That was,
16.
it's coming out of the general fund and parking system budgets.
Correct. Previously, it was just really rolled in as far as the street resurfacing line item, that budget amount, and then in the parking fund, we did allocate some. So this is really just breaking it out a little further in detail. Pulling it out of the street resurfacing amount to keep that $1,750,000 there, and with this additional funds for parking.
Very good. Any other questions or discussion? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions. I'll start with the public benefit improvement for Elmhurst Memorial Hospital. I know that we've been talking for a long time about needing to redo the intersections that will provide access to the hospital, but I also know that as part of the redevelopment, the city took responsibility for some improvements, especially along Harvard and some of the border streets between the residential community and the new hospital. And I've heard, I'm sure many of us have heard from some residents that it isn't yet as smooth as they would like it to be, the separation between the residential neighborhood and the hospital. Is any of this money available to help ensure that the upgrades, especially along Harvard, that we were initially responsible for are going to be implemented in the way that we'd intended a couple of years ago?
Well, the funding that's in this year's budget is specifically for the York and Brush Hill area. And I would think the grant specifically addresses that and probably would not allow us to spend it on Harvard. I know we're trying to address issues that come up along there as we hear of them, and we've been in discussion with the hospital folks to try to implement more improvements to help them. I believe everything that was laid out in the initial plan has been done. Mike Hughes, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe everything that was anticipated to be done is done. And it's a matter of now working with the hospital and the neighbors to try to improve that.
Thank you.
Alderman Bram.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A handful of questions. One, just a general question when it comes to the overall priorities. Does each department actually come to the table with a priority of each of these items, and then they're consolidated and discussed and reassessed at that point? Or is this a department-by-department priority list? And
Well, they're not ranked against each other.
they're not,
As far as categorizing them A through D.
right?
They're not ranked against each other. It's ranked in, as we presented it, by the evaluation system that's been put in place.
The evaluation system meaning what? The 1
Essential
through
and immediate
4 and
need.
A through D?
A through D.
Okay, so they're not ranked against each other, so that was my main question. On page 4 of the capital budget, not on the slides, but on the actual capital budget, on the revenue side, last fiscal year, 11-12, we were showing a grant of $600,000, which is a good thing, the first in a while that we received a grant for the capital improvement fund. But there's nothing targeted going forward. Are we continuously applying for grants to assist us with our capital improvements here? Or is this just what we know today, we don't have any grants?
I would think that was a grant that was already applied for and probably awarded at the time that we knew of. I think it's hard for us to anticipate those into the future and count on them as a revenue source, but I can tell you that we are always looking for grants for any of the projects that we have.
Okay. Just a comment of, same page on the general fund transfers, or actually in the back of the book as well. I'm actually glad to see that the line item for concrete street reconstruction is reinstituted or budgeted for this upcoming fiscal year. I think it is desperately needed in the northeast section of Elmhurst. So I'm glad to see that there will be funds available, or planned to be funds available for those improvements. The question I have, and this was the same as last year, the public benefit sidewalk installation for the second straight year, it's still zeroed out in the budget, and this is the area where if a neighborhood does not have sidewalks, we do have a program in place to allow them to petition and apply for sidewalks, new sidewalks in the area. This was not reinstated this year, but I do see that the shared program, the shared sidewalk program, once again, is still in the budget for the same amount of approximately $150,000. I guess what I'm asking is, what is the rationale for continuously, for the second year in a row, not budgeting that line item for new sidewalks in neighborhoods that do not have them?
I'm not following the shared sidewalk in the list here. I'm sorry.
Public benefit sidewalk installation is about halfway through the page on page 4. And I don't have it highlighted, so I'd have to find it. It's definitely in the back of the book. I don't know if staff can help me out, but I know, if you give me a second, I'll continue to look here. Anybody else can help out?
There's no money in 12-13 for the public benefit sidewalk installation.
That's what I'm speaking of, yes.
If I could, the 50/50 is the sidewalk curb and gutter program.
It's on page 27.
Just above the public's, on the same page, 4, just above public benefit sidewalk installation, which is the new construction. And then the item above it, sidewalk curb and gutter, is actually the 50/50 cost-sharing program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So my concern here is that for the second year in a row, a relatively new instituted program, definitely a safety issue in the neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks. Neighborhoods that do have sidewalks, I think is also a good program. The 50/50 share or sidewalk repair program continues to be funded, but my concern is still unfunding the new sidewalk program. And even though that it's funded for, or projected to be funded in the following year being the next fiscal year, it's only proposed at least to be funded for 50,000. Past history shows us that, you know, any street that does need the new sidewalks is way above the 50,000 mark. So it's almost like, what's the point of even funding 50,000 if it's not gonna actually fund one block of installation? But my concern isn't next year, it's about this year, and trying to understand the rationale on why it's not funded this year.
Well, obviously, there's a pool of money that we need to allocate towards the projects, and as I said in the beginning, the theme I would kind of put on this budget is maintaining, and if there are issues with sidewalks where we need to replace them and we can get the cost share for half of that, our rationale was we can actually get some of the revenue for that and maintain the sidewalks that we have rather than install new ones.
If I may, I mean, the city replaces sidewalks that are a liability. The 50/50 share program is when a resident feels the necessity to replace one square, multiple squares. It could be for aesthetic reasons, it could be for any reason. When the city is aware of any type of liability issue of a public sidewalk, we do go out and either replace or repair by slab jacking, et cetera. So I guess we could move on from this line item, but this is something, I guess, when we dive deeper into the overall budget, I would like to discuss further, because I do feel that residents walking in the streets is definitely just as important as residents walking on cracked sidewalks that currently have them installed today.
Good. Anybody else, questions or discussion? And we're gonna have multiple bites at the apple on the budget naturally until we've got the schedule set up here, so, but Alderman Dunn.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at the five-year outlook on the capital improvement budget, we have about a $70 million plan right now. Next year being close to $30 million of that. In the remaining 4 years, we're averaging maybe about $10 million a year. So it jumps out at me as a very large year for capital expenditures. I don't know, is it perhaps a record year for capital expenditures compared to what we're planning in the 4 out years? It's rather large. I know the federal grant portion of that is an uncertainty. We generally don't know that till a year or so in advance, but that only makes up about a $1 or $2 million of that number. So just want to comment on the magnitude of next year in relation to the out years.
Very good. Anybody else? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Page 21, the rear yard drain program. And I know that that was a program that we had some discussion about earlier this year and added some funding to. And I'd like to take a look at this, partly because I know every year we'll get a chance to talk about the capital portion of the budget, and then we never really get a chance to talk about the capital portion of the budget, because tonight is really our opportunity to do that. So I'd like to take a look at the rear yard drain program, because we've effectively doubled the amount that we're putting into it without really having spent time rethinking what this program is, what it can fund, and how it affects the overall stormwater management in the city. And I'm a little concerned that we've projected ahead a spending every year of $100,000 for the next 5 years without having benefit of the discussions on how this is an overall component of our stormwater management and what other activities we may encourage residents to do that may also be eligible for this funding. So I'm curious as to what we think our process is going to be moving forward with rear yard drainage issues, which aren't necessarily all solved by hooking rear yards directly into the storm sewer system. So perhaps the question embedded in all of this is, what process are we as a council expecting to go through as we're looking toward expending this particular line item, which has been increased? And I know if we're going to increase something, something's got to give. So we've just found out about one particular capital line item that's a give, and this one seems to be kind of a take. So, so I'd be interested in hearing a response to that.
Well, I guess if we receive different direction from if we investigate some other alternatives through the Public Works Committee and then get some different direction from the City Council to reallocate these dollars, certainly we would do that. This project seems to have been successful in the past, which is why it's continued, because it's been heavily used, is my understanding. Successful in what it's aimed to do. Now, if our direction is something different, something alternative, we can always change this budget item to reflect that.
But isn't this budget item about double what it's been in the past? Haven't we spent only about $50,000 a year in the rear yard drain program? And this is projecting forward at $100,000 a year.
I'm gonna have to get some help from the audience on that one, and I see they're diligently working on it.
It actually was quite a bit larger some years ago. I don't have it with me, and then it was reduced when the budget kind of, the structural imbalance came in, and so we're returning it to more of a level that it was at. We did 62 total last year, and we have 32 estimates outstanding, so it continues to be a very accessed program. And I would just offer that, as City Manager Grabowski said, currently the way the process and the policy is set up, it's for rear yard drains, but if the City Council wanted to start including other measures as rain gardens or other things that would be suitable for this type of handling of a backyard wet area, maybe a rain garden is a more appropriate use, that policy discussion could go on, and this money would then be appropriated for those types of improvements as well.
I have a follow-up. Well, I know we did over 60 rear yard drains last year, but that's because we redirected funding from other programs into the rear yard drain program. How many drains did we do the year before?
I believe that was overhead sewers.
Thank you. My mistake.
Very good. I think, too, we need to keep in mind that we have a task force looking at all these issues, along with two excellent engineering firms. That report will be out probably sometime this spring, and I'm sure there'll be some ideas there, as well as to different options that we might be able to use for both. So that'll be coming out again this spring. So, Alderman Pezza.
I was just going to ask Mike Hughes a quick, is that 62 number a pretty average number per year, or was it more this year because of the flood, or do you recall an average number per year?
It definitely fluctuates with what kind of years we're having. So in 2005, we weren't doing any, and lately we've been doing a lot, so.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Anybody else for questions or discussion on the 5-year? Okay. We'll move on to other business. Anybody with other business? One thing I forgot to mention before I go to ask for a motion to adjourn is, under announcements, the State of the City address, which is coming up on the 17th, Tuesday, at Community Bank of Elmhurst at 7:30. And myself, and I would hope the City Council would be there in attendance as well. We'll be talking about the state of our city, and we encourage all to attend. It's being put on by the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Community Bank of Elmhurst, so please come. January 17th. It's, I believe, 2 weeks from today. 7:30 in the morning. And there is limited seating, so please call the chamber office and reserve your seating accordingly. So, and with that, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Alderman Hipskin with a motion, seconded by Chairman Wagner. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.